Hello again, I'm Ray with another podcast episode. Ed from Michigan, hello Ed, got a lot of listeners actually in America, which is good, quite a few. Ed has said, we love you Brits, as he put it in his email, we love you Brits, and we'd like to know, or he'd like to know, what our homes were like. Not so much the houses, but the homes. What was the bedroom like back in the 50s? What sort of bed did you have? What was the kitchen like? Furnishings, all this sort of thing. All about the home in the 1950s. So, okay, Ed, that's a good idea. Also, another idea that's cropped up, which I might do next week. It might take a couple of weeks, actually, because I've got to do some research. Local history, where I am in Worthing, West Sussex, UK. We had, in the wartime years, we had a radar station, or a couple, I think, in a certain area. And I want to look into that. I want to do a little bit of research into that. And I might do an episode about that, which might be interesting, certainly to local people, but even people further afield, well, such as you, Ed, what it was like here in the 50s after the war. I do remember a lot of air raid shelters around the place that we used to go and play in as kids. Anyway, back to the 1950s home. The first thing I remember is my bed. I was born in 51, so I do remember kind of from 56 onwards, if you like. My bed, it was a single bed. I think it was a 4-foot bed, 4-foot single. So it was quite wide, not a double bed. I think it was 3'6". It was big anyway. I remember my mother saying it was far too big for the room really, but it was brilliant. A wooden frame, none of your pine rubbish. This was oak, solid oak frame. The thing weighed a ton. A mattress, as we have now. If you lifted the mattress off, you could see all the metalwork, the metal frame underneath, all the metal springs. In fact, those springs, I used all that lot as an aerial for my little valve radio I had by the bed, just attach the aerial wire from the radio to the metalwork under the bed. It made quite a good aerial. So you had all this, and then on top of that, the mattress. Then you had a blanket on the mattress and a sheet. That's sort of similar to what you have now, isn't it? And it was all tucked in all round. Pillow at the top, obviously. Then you had another sheet and then another blanket. And you folded those two back at the top near the pillow and tucked the thing in all the way round. So you made like a sleeping bag, I suppose. It was all tucked in and you could sort of slither in there and it was all nice and cosy. And on top of that whole thing, you then put an eider down. Now, that was, I suppose, the predecessor to the quilt. It was called an eider down because it was full of down, feathers, from the eider duck. The eider duck in particular had nice soft and heat retaining, I suppose, feathers, insulation properties and all that. It was really nice. So eider down or eider feathers were stuffed into this big thing. It was like a quilt and you bung that on top of the whole thing. So when you got into the bed, you're tucked in all the way around, and if it's summer, you don't use the eider down. If it's winter, you've got that on top of you, and it was really nice. And I missed that. I missed the bed. That was my favourite bed of all time. But I missed the way it was done with the blankets and the sheets. Really nice. You could put an extra blanket on top in the winter, underneath the eider down. I remember when I first got a quilt, when I first got married, we were furnishing the house and we bought the bed and we bought a quilt. And I remember that first night thinking, well, this isn't any good. My legs sticking out the side, the feet stick out the bottom. It fell off. It all went to one side and fell off. So I obviously eventually got used to the quilt, but it wasn't something that I like. I still don't particularly like quilts. I wake up in the night and I've either got all the quilt or none of it. They seem to walk in the night. I don't know quite why. They had a TOG rating, TOG, which was, I suppose, the thickness. You'd have a lower TOG number for the summer and a higher TOG for the winter. We just use one TOG thing for all year round. In the summer, just kick the thing off. In the winter, keep it on. But beds aren't what they used to be, that's for sure. You'd have a bedside cabinet or table by the bed for your light and your radio or whatever. Or adults for their ashtray. People smoked in bed. I remember a skull in my friend's hall. What was it? Poor old Fred smoked in bed. Obviously he burnt himself and died. But carpet on the floor, marley tiles. We had a new bungalow in the early 50s when we moved there. It had just been built. In fact, the garden was all mud and clay and horrible. And marley tiles, they were the in thing. They were like vinyl tiles, concrete floor in the bungalow. So unlike, proper house, you couldn't dig it up and put a load of cables in like I do in our house here. Marley tiles, they were vinyl things. And you'd have a carpet in the middle of the room, a rug, big carpet. No such thing as fitted carpets then. And you'd have a mop, which was sort of a hairy thing on a stick. And you go around on the marley tiles. And you could also, once you've done that and got all the dust off, you had this liquid stuff. I forget what it was called. No doubt someone will remind me. It was like a varnish. You'd put it on the tiles and they'd have a kind of wet shine to them. They look really nice. The only trouble is it chipped off. And then it looked dreadful. And if you put more of the stuff on, it just looked worse. So that was it. Marley tiles with a rug or carpet in the middle. Same in the hall. You'd have just a long hall carpet. Didn't reach the skirting boards each side because you had your marley tiles showing. Now the kitchen. Let's go to the kitchen, shall we? Stone the crows. In the winter, the whole place was freezing, right? But the kitchen was the warmest place. Now, our bungalow didn't have a boiler. In older properties, they had a boiler in the kitchen. You'd put coal, it wasn't coal, it was coke, sort of similar to coal. You put that in it, it would heat up the kitchen. You'd have little metal rods sticking out of the chimney pipe where you could hang, anything, nappies, towels, tea towels to dry over the heat of the boiler. It heated the water, so you had hot water from the boiler, and all you had to do was keep chucking coke into it. Keep stoking it up with coke and emptying the ashpan, which you could do in those days in the dustbin because they were metal dustbins, not plastic like today where it would melt. So that was it. We had electric fire, no boiler in this new build in the 50s. Apparently it was old-fashioned to have a boiler. Electric fire. And the hot water was an immersion heater, electric again. And you'd have an electric fire in the bedroom. Before you knew it, you've got electric fires everywhere, all 2 or 3 kilowatts each, electric immersion heater. So the whole place was taking a huge amount of electricity, which cost a fortune. Because in the lounge there was a coal fire. I'll come back to the lounge in a minute. In the kitchen we had the table, which had a Formica top. Formica was in by then, with a cloth on the top, and it was a plastic cloth, not the old cotton type. We had a plastic cloth on the top with dreadful pictures on. Was it grapes and cherries and stuff like that, leeks and cabbages? But the thing was, you could wipe the plastic top, whereas a cloth, obviously you had to wash it. There weren't many power points in the kitchen because don't forget then, you didn't have a toaster. Well, I think we had a toaster. You didn't have a mixer. You didn't have an electric can opener. You didn't have a juicer. You didn't have a squasher. You didn't have an air fryer. You didn't have a deep fat fryer. You didn't have, mobile phone chargers to plug in. So you didn't have all these electric appliances. Okay, washing machine, tumble dryer, the list goes on and on. So there are only a couple of power points in the kitchen. One for the electric kettle, which we had. Do you remember the Swan electric kettles? What was it? Boil a pint of water in 90 seconds, I think was the advert. Something like that. So you had very few power points in the kitchen. The cooker we had, we had an electric one to begin with. Awful thing, with hot plates. If the bottom of the saucepan was slightly dented or not quite completely flat, it didn't meet the hot plate properly, so the heat transfer just wasn't there properly, and the whole thing took a fortune in electricity to run it. You know the sun's out in Worthing where I am, don't you? Listen. Aeroplane. I've always said this. Shoreham Airport, as soon as the sun comes out, they all rush down there and fly around in their planes, or buzz around in their planes. There we are. So on the kitchen floor, there was marley tiles, but we went a bit posh. We had vinolay, not lino. Lino was even earlier. That was dreadful stuff as well. Vinolay. And it was awful. It was a picture, apparently it had been photographed on Brighton Beach, and it was pebbles on the beach. So you walk into the kitchen and it looks like it was a load of pebbles. Looks like you're walking on pebbles on the beach, which I suppose was better than the marley tiles. Easier to clean because it was only sort of 2 or 3 strips of this rather than a load of, what were they, about 8-inch tiles, were they? With grooves all round to get the dirt. So, yeah, that was quite good. We had a larder. Initially, we didn't have a fridge. We had a larder, which was supposed to be for cooling things down, keeping things cool. It had a concrete shelf, which was tiled, and that did keep pretty cool. Well, certainly in the winter. The whole house was pretty cool in the winter, with ice on the windows, ice inside on the windows. Milk in the summer, you had to keep it somewhere in a bucket of water in the coolest place possible. The larder sometimes was cool, but if you kept changing the water, get fresh cold water and keep your milk bottles in that, then it would remain fairly cool. The trouble is, I remember what I hated about milk was the dots in milk. As a kid, I'd have a cup of tea or a glass of milk, and if it's got dots in it, I don't want that filth. It was dreadful. Dots. I think that's where it was beginning to go off. What was it? Curdle or something awful? I think that put me off milk for life. I'll only drink milk if it's straight out of the fridge, really cold. Anything warm, forget it. The kitchen units, the cupboards and worktops, the worktops were Formica because that was the in thing, as I've said. The units themselves, they weren't chipboard like today or melamine. They were wooden cupboards on the walls and below the work surface. They were painted cream. Now, this was a brand new bungalow we moved into with red handles. And that, I suppose, in the 50s, I suppose that was really modern. Looking back, I suppose I did think it was really nice, this brand new bungalow, when I picture it now as it was. Shame I didn't take more photographs in those days. I got a camera when I was whatever age, and I should have taken more photographs. So that was the kitchen, really. There wasn't much else in there. We didn't have a washing machine. Oh, yes, we did have a washing machine. We had a Hoover single tub washing machine. Later on, we got a Keymatic. Do you remember the Hoover Keymatic? Sloping front. A huge thing, dreadful thing. And it had huge pipes going to it for the hot and cold with garden hose type connectors, not the little plastic ones you've got now. And I remember this Hoover Keymatic, and we were one of the first people in the street and at my school to have an automatic washing machine. You put these programming plates, well, that's why it was called Keymatic. You put these sort of programming keys in, these flat plastic plates, and it would do different programs. So I think that was probably one of the first automatic washing machines. You open the front bit and it was sloping down, not like today where the front of it is flat. It was probably, well, not quite 45 degrees, but sloping. That was a huge and very, very noisy thing. Going back to the first one we had, the Hoover single tub, that had a mangle on the top with a handle. And you'd wind the handle and feed the clothes out of the tub between the two sort of rubber rollers, and it would squeeze the water out. I remember helping my mum with that. I'd turn the hand. You've got to be careful with your fingers, otherwise they get crushed. Then, of course, all the water turns red, and you've got to do the washing all over again. So I think that's enough about the kitchen. The lounge, we had the coal fire, which was very nice, the coal fire going. We had a gas poker with a red rubber hose, like the old school Bunsen burners used to have, red rubber hose to the gas tap, which was next to the fireplace, all highly dangerous. You'd light this poker and then shove it into the pile of coal in the grate, and eventually the coal would sort of catch light and burn. All very dangerous. You'd have a clothes horse around, basically a wooden frame that you'd stand in front of the fire, and you could hang your washing on there to dry out. Also, the coal fire was very useful because Sunday night was bath night. You didn't wash any other time. Well, you washed, but you didn't have a bath. And as kids, you get out of the bath, everywhere in the winter is freezing. You put a towel around you, you're shivering, your teeth are chattering. I remember this so well. You'd run through the hall into the lounge, stand in front of the coal fire, shivering like mad, and your mum would dry you off very quickly and get your warm pyjamas on, which you'd had on the clothes horse by the fire. Yes, that was Sunday night, bath night. And of course, then you get into the cold bed, except you might have a hot water bottle. So you'd kind of snuggle down with that and either read a comic or a book with your torch or under the blankets. Yeah, that was good fun. Or listen to your bedside radio if you had one. Also in the lounge, we had a put-you-up. It was an awful thing. It was like a settee or a sofa called a put-you-up. It opened out into a huge double bed, and there were levers and springs, and it would creak and grind, and My nan would sleep on that when she came down some weekends. She'd sleep on this horrible put-you-up thing. That was awful. The old black and white telly in the corner. Of course, initially that was BBC only. There were no channels, that was it. Later in the 50s, when was it? 56, 55? I can't remember. 50 something. ITV came along. So, of course, no one had aerials or anything for that. You'd have an adapter fitted to the telly, which later in life, when I became a radio and TV engineer, I was actually fitting not ITV adapters, but BBC Two adapters, well, a tuner unit. You'd have this telly and you'd fit a BBC Two tuner unit to a UHF tuner unit. Anyway, that's veering off on something else. So, yeah, you had this old telly in the corner that went wrong every 5 minutes, of course. Luckily, we knew from a local radio and TV shop, we knew the engineer there. So any problems, give him a call, he'd come around and sort it out. And that was very useful because tellies in those days went wrong every 5 minutes. What else was there in the lounge? A sideboard, which was a huge wooden cabinet, dark brown wood, looked awful, with doors, and there was a drawer in the top which was lined with, what's that stuff? Beige, is it? Snooker table cloth, lined with this green cloth. And that was for knives and forks, posh knives and forks. Posh knives and forks. For normally you'd have that in the dining room, but we didn't have a dining room, just a lounge. We'd set a table up in the lounge for Sunday lunch, Sunday dinner. And then you used the posh knives and forks out of the sideboard. On top of the sideboard, we had a big old wooden radio. And I remember on Sundays, what was it? Billy Cotton Band Show. That's it, the Billy Cotton Band Show. Clitheroe Kid, that's it, the Clitheroe Kid. All these things. Round the Horn, the Navy Lark. They were terrific programmes. I loved them all. When I was a kid, I loved that. I loved Sundays. Listen to all that. Billy Cotton Band Show, and they'd all shout and stuff. And, oh dear. Happy days indeed. Also on the radio was Listen with Mother. I think that was 2 o'clock, weekdays. But yeah, that's going back a few years. So there was this settee thing, a couple of armchairs, ashtrays, of course, several ashtrays around the room, because back in those days everyone smoked, or it seemed just about everyone smoked. Marley tiles around the outside, curtains, dreadful curtain rail. They used to have pelmets, these sort of wooden pelmets that had curved shapes in the bottom of them. They looked absolutely dreadful thinking back. We don't have pelmets anymore, do we? I don't think people have pelmets. You just have your kind of a swish. Do you remember that when that first came out? The swish curtain rails. Yeah, I remember that. That must have been 60s. So that's basically the lounge. I don't think there was much more in there. Oh, the mantelpiece clock, of course. Everyone had a mantelpiece clock, which is an old wind-up thing that told the wrong time half the time. So, yes, and that would chime, which was annoying. Some of them you could turn on, like our one, you could turn the chime off, little lever on the front. The only other clock in the house was the kitchen clock, which were normally by that stage electric. You'd have a little clock point, as they were called, and you wire it into there, hang the thing on the wall, and the wire would just go into the clock point. And a bedside clock, well, the kids didn't, but the parents had their alarm clock by the bed. The bathroom was just a terrible, freezing cold fridge in the winter. Bath, toilet, wash basin, that was about it. Perhaps a mat on the floor, again Marley tiles, freezing cold concrete floor, perhaps a mat on the floor, and shaving cabinets. Everyone had shaving cabinets, as they were called. Basically, it was a white wooden cabinet on the wall with mirrors on the front of the two doors. You open the doors and in there you've got your shaving gear, I suppose, and the mirrors where you could see yourself shave. Everyone had a shaving cabinet. I don't think there was much else in the bathroom. You might have an airing cupboard, which was handy because that would warm the bathroom up a little bit, you know, with your hot water tank in there, if you were lucky. But a lot of people had airing cupboards in the hallway, as we did in our bungalow. So the bathroom was freezing, so cold. Try and imagine this, the younger people listening. Imagine this, your basin, right? You turn on the tap in the morning to fill it up, perhaps to have a wash. Well, these days you have a shower, don't you? But you turn the tap on. The basin would fill up with water, even though you hadn't put the plug in. Why? Because the waste pipe was solid ice. Not only outside, inside. You know, the U-bend or the S-bend under the basin. That was a block of ice. That shows you how cold it was in the bathroom. And what you'd have to do is run hot water there and try and melt the ice, and eventually the waste pipe would clear. Of course, pipes were always freezing, pipes in the loft where the water tank was. Again, a lot of people don't have water tanks in the loft. We've got a combi boiler. No water tanks, no pipes in the loft at all. Freezing pipes was such a regular occurrence, as were chimney fires. I remember on the housing estate down the road from us, there are always chimney fires. Anyway, that's that. So I think that's the lounge covered. Just going back to the washing and the mangle, there was nowhere to dry the washing in the winter because, there was no central heating. What could you do? You couldn't put it outside. It was raining and snowing and stuff. It was always snowing in the winter then. Doesn't seem to do that now. Well, not here on the south coast anyway. So you only had the coal fire with the clothes horse, and you have all the washing hanging in front of the fire. And of course that would make the house damp. Well, one other thing, thinking of bedrooms, just going back to that, I remember we had a paraffin heater. Can you imagine that? Was it Valor? A sort of upright paraffin heater thing that was absolutely dreadful. Imagine having that in the bedroom these days. Talk about health and safety. I mean, the fumes from the thing would fill the bedroom because you'd close the bedroom door. It's eating up oxygen and it's damp. It causes condensation because paraffin seemed to have some sort of, water in it or something, and it causes condensation. So you've got this stinking paraffin heater in the middle of the bedroom, which I suppose it did something to warm the room, did it? I can't remember. I shouldn't think so. There was no loft insulation, nothing like that. That wasn't around. No double glazing, drafty windows. Well, we had what were they, crittle windows, the metal windows. Bungalows previous to that had wooden window frames. We had the metal crittle ones, which came in, I think, in the 50s. So can you imagine that? A paraffin heater in the bedroom. So I think that's about it as far as the home was concerned. Outside in the garden, of course, everyone had a shed. Everyone had a garden shed. Absolutely everyone. You had to, because you've got to have somewhere to keep the dreadful old push-along lawnmower. Garden tools. And also, actually, talking of garden tools, you'd have a lot of a dibber for potatoes and all that sort of thing, because people grew all their own vegetables. Well, a lot of them did. Grew their own vegetables and fruit. You'd have fruit trees if you had a big enough garden. Blackberries, gooseberries, all this sort of thing. Black currants. No, not blackberries. You go and pick those from the countryside. So garden tools in the shed. Everyone had their sheds really organised nicely. You'd have all the tools hanging up and labelled. Half the garden would be lawn, and the rest of it, if it was big enough, as I say, you'd have all the vegetable plot down there. Possibly a greenhouse. Those that had a little bit of money could have a greenhouse, which was great because then you've got cucumbers, tomatoes, all that sort of thing you'd grow in the greenhouse, which was really nice. We didn't have a garage. I think people later on built garages. You had a driveway, a shared drive, which wasn't nice, but people later built garages. Bungalows then, new builds then, didn't come with garages because very few people had cars. So what's the point of having a garage? You only fill it up with junk. Garages became very popular, I think, in the 60s when families, most families were getting a car. So I think that's about it. I won't ramble on anymore in case you're all dozing off and drive you all to drink. Of course, pubs in those days. No, let's not talk about pubs. Okay, thanks for listening as always. Hope you enjoyed that, Ed. Thanks for the idea from Michigan. Let me know if you enjoyed it. And I shall see you all next Sunday. Bye-bye for now.